Magnesium burning white, 5,600 degrees. Metal screaming. Tom Mitchell was fighting the yoke. Flames poured from the left wing of the Boeing B-29, eating through aluminum like acid through paper. Not a small fire, not something you could smother with a CO2 bottle. This was a chemical inferno, the kind that turned structural metal into liquid in seconds. 8 seconds. That was all the time left before the main wing spar failed. Jim Carter, 23 years old farm kid from Kansas, sat at the flight engineer station, watching instruments explode into red zones, cylinder head temperatures climbing past any number he had ever seen. 290 degrees Celsius, 310, 340. The needle kept rising. Tom's voice came through the intercom, impossibly calm for a man about to die. "Tell Boeing the cowl flaps don't work." The wing folded. The B-29 entered a flat spin nose, pitching down the world, rotating outside the cockpit windows. Jim felt himself thrown against the bulkhead. Pain, darkness, then nothing. Impact. The bomber plunged into the Fry and Company meatpacking plant on the south side of Boeing Field, Seattle. The building collapsed. Fire erupted through 3 stories of wooden structure. People inside never had a chance to run. 32 dead in seconds. Tom Mitchell. 10 crew members, 20 factory workers at their lunch break, 1 firefighter who responded to the initial alarm. All gone because an engine caught fire. February 18th, 1943, 12:26 Pacific wartime. This is the story of the most dangerous airplane America ever built, the B-29 Superfortress, the bomber that would win the Pacific War, the aircraft that just killed the best test pilot in the country. The engine that powered it, the Wright R-3350, had a fatal flaw built into its core design. When it caught fire, and it caught fire constantly, magnesium alloy in the crankcase burned so hot, it melted through wing spars before crews could react. Here are the numbers that should terrify you. Of 414 B-29 bombers lost over Japan during the entire war, only 147 were shot down by enemy fighters in anti-aircraft fire. 267. That is 64.12% lost to engine fires and mechanical failures. The Wright R-3350 killed more American airmen than the Japanese. The Army Air Forces knew this. Boeing knew this. Wright Aeronautical, the company that built the engines, absolutely knew this. And they rushed the bomber into production anyway because the war could not wait for safety. But one man survived that crash in Seattle. Jim Carter, a 23-year-old flight engineer who had been on the airplane for exactly 14 days. And he made it his mission to finish what Tom Mitchell started. This is how a farm kid from Kansas fought the biggest aviation company in America. How he exposed corporate corruption that reached all the way to Congress. How he helped save thousands of bomber crews. But the engines were already in production. 30,000 Wright R-3350 engines rolling off factory assembly lines in New Jersey and Cincinnati. The war could not wait. The bombers could not stop flying. And kids like Jim Carter had to figure out how to survive them. 6 months earlier, August 1942, Jim Carter grew up on a wheat farm 30 miles outside Wichita, Kansas. 500 acres of hard red winter wheat, the kind that made bread flour. His father worked that land from sunup to sundown every day, 7 days a week. Then the Depression came. 1936, wheat prices collapsed. Banks foreclosed on farms across Kansas like dominoes falling. Jim was 16 years old when the bank took their land, old enough to understand what it meant, old enough to see the defeat in his father's eyes. He remembered watching his father stand in the empty yard staring at dirt he no longer owned. No anger, no tears, just the hollow acceptance of a man who had lost everything to forces beyond his control. The family moved to Wichita. His father got work at the Boeing plant. Not skilled labor, just assembly line work riveting aluminum panels onto B-17 bomber fuselages. 60 cents an hour. Better than starving. Jim started at the plant a year later, 17 years old, sweeping floors, cleaning metal shavings off machine tools. The lowest job on the factory hierarchy. But Jim had a gift that nobody knew about yet. He would find discarded maintenance manuals in the trash bins. Technical drawings that supervisors threw away when they got coffee stains or torn corners. Jim would take them home, spread them out on the kitchen table, and teach himself engineering by the light of a kerosene lamp. How fuel systems worked, How hydraulic actuators translated pilot inputs into control surface movement. How superchargers compressed intake air to maintain power at altitude. He absorbed it like a sponge absorbs water. Frank Murphy noticed. Murphy was the foreman of the engine maintenance section, 52 years old, an ex-World War I aircraft mechanic who had kept French Nieuports flying on the Western Front. Murphy had seen plenty of young kids who thought they knew engines. Most of them were idiots. Jim was different. Murphy found him one afternoon in the parts storage area reading a Pratt & Whitney R-1830 maintenance manual he had fished out of the scrap bin. "You understand that?" Jim looked up startled. "Yes, sir. Most of it." Murphy pointed at a diagram. "Explain the supercharger drive gear ratio." Jim did, correctly, including the metallurgical reasons why the gears were made from case-hardened steel instead of aluminum. Murphy stared at him for a long moment. "Kid, you got talent, but talent means nothing without grit. You willing to work?" "Yes, sir." Murphy took Jim under his wing, taught him how engines really work, not just how the manuals said they worked, the difference between theory and reality, how to hear problems before instruments showed them, how to read oil consistency for bearing wear. Then Pearl Harbor happened. December 7th, 1941. Jim was 21 years old. He tried to enlist as a pilot the next morning. He passed every test except the vision exam. His left eye was slightly myopic, not enough to matter in civilian life, enough to disqualify him from pilot training. The recruiting sergeant saw his disappointment. "Son, the Army Air Forces is going to need flight engineers, men who can keep engines running in combat. You interested?" Jim took the mechanical aptitude test. He scored higher than anyone the recruiter had ever seen, 98 out of 100. The 2 points he missed were on questions about radial engine magneto timing that literally nobody gets right. January 1943. Jim received orders. Report to Boeing Field, Seattle, Washington. Assignment B-29 Superfortress Test Program. Flight Engineer Training. He arrived on a cold morning with rain turning to sleet. Boeing Field sat on the southern edge of Seattle, right on the WWII River. Massive hangars, construction everywhere. The war effort running 24 hours a day. His first time seeing a B-29, Jim just stopped and stared. The airplane was enormous. Wingspan 141 feet. Fuselage 99 feet long. 4 engines, each one a mechanical monster. The aircraft sat on the ramp like a steel cathedral, aluminum skin gleaming in the weak winter sunlight. Beautiful and terrifying. Ground Crew Chief Mark Sullivan gave Jim the tour. Sullivan was 38, an Irish immigrant who had worked on flying boats for Pan American before the war. He knew aircraft and he knew when something was wrong. "Kid, welcome to the most dangerous test program in American aviation." Sullivan walked Jim around the left inboard engine, the Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 9, all connected to a single crankshaft. 3,350 cubic inches of displacement, the most powerful production aircraft engine in the world. "See these oil lines?" Sullivan pointed at compression fittings around the engine mount. "They leak constantly. We tighten them before every flight. They still leak." He pointed at the exhaust manifold, a complex web of steel tubing that collected gases from 9 cylinders. "Exhaust valves crack. Every dozen hours of running time. White-hot gas sprays onto the engine mount. If there is oil there, and there is always oil there, it ignites." Sullivan tapped the engine cowling the aluminum shell that enclosed the power plant. "The crankcase is made with high magnesium content. Saves weight. But when it catches fire, and it will catch fire, that magnesium burns at 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt through the wing spar in seconds." Jim stared at the engine. All that complexity, all that power, all that danger. "How often do they catch fire?" Sullivan laughed. It was not a happy sound. "Often enough that we have 2 gunners whose only job is to watch for fires. No other bomber, American or German, carries dedicated fire spotters. The B-29 needs them because these engines catch fire that often." Jim's first engine run-up happened that afternoon. Sullivan showed him the procedure. Prime the cylinders. Engage starter. Monitor oil pressure, fuel flow, manifold pressure, cylinder head temperature. The engine fired, 18 cylinders roaring to life. The noise was incredible. The whole aircraft vibrated. Jim watched the temperature gauges. Cylinder heads climbed fast, too fast, passing 200 degrees Celsius, 220, 240, into the red zone, 90 seconds after start. Jim looked at Sullivan alarmed. Sullivan just shrugged. That is normal for this piece of shit. The second week of February, Jim flew his first test flight with Tom Mitchell. Tom Mitchell was 42 years old, 20 years of flying experience. 14 crashes survived, 11 speed records. He had flown everything from racing planes to experimental prototypes. The Army Air Forces trusted him with their most valuable aircraft because Tom had never lost an airplane he could save. Last month, Tom saved the first B-29 prototype from a triple engine failure. One engine on fire, two more about to fail, smoke choking the cockpit. He could have bailed out. Instead, he brought the bomber back, landed it downwind because there was no time for a proper pattern, and saved the only flying B-29 prototype in existence. The Army gave him a rare civilian air medal for that flight. But Tom knew something nobody wanted to talk about. The Wright R-3350 was not ready, not even close. Tom met with Boeing CEO Robert Harrison 2 days before Jim arrived. Harrison's office overlooked the production floor. The sounds of riveting and metal cutting filled the air even through closed windows. Harrison slid a check across the desk, $50,000, equivalent to $800,000 in modern money. Tom, you have gone above and beyond. The Army wants you to continue as chief test pilot through production ramp-up. This is our way of saying thank you. Tom looked at the check, enough to retire comfortably. Buy a house, never risk his life again. He thought about the triple engine fire, the heat, the smoke, the certainty that he was about to die. Bob, I'm done. This is my last contract. After we finish the cow flap tests, I'm out. Harrison nodded slowly. He looked tired. I understand. Can't say I blame you. These engines are breaking the best pilots we have. They shook hands. Tom left Boeing Field that evening, thinking he would never fly a B-29 again. The next morning, Tom had to process paperwork at the training facility, administrative work before his contract ended. He walked through the halls, passing classrooms where young pilots sat learning B-29 systems. In one room, he saw them, 20 pilots, none older than 25, farm boys, college kids, mechanics promoted to flight school, eager, excited, completely unaware of what they were getting into. Tom stopped in the doorway. The instructor was showing them engine instruments, cylinder head temperature gauges, oil pressure indicators, fire warning lights. The Wright R-3350 is the most powerful production aircraft engine in the world, the instructor said. Properly managed, it will take you all the way to Tokyo and back. Tom wanted to walk in and tell them the truth, that the engines caught fire constantly, that the onboard extinguishers failed 87% of the time, that magnesium fires could melt through wing spars before you had time to bail out. But he stayed silent. Let the instructor finish. After class, one of the young pilots approached Tom in the hallway. Dark hair, West Virginia accent, eager expression. Excuse me, sir, are you Tom Mitchell? I am. Danny Morrison, sir. I heard you saved a B-29 from triple engine failure last month. Is it true the engines catch fire a lot? Tom looked at the kid. 20 years old, maybe 21, the same age Tom had been when he started flying. Yes, they catch fire. But you can handle it. Why? I mean, if you follow procedures. Tom thought about the answer he should give, the reassuring lie that would let him walk away with a clear conscience. Instead, he told the truth. Sometimes, if you are fast, if you are lucky, if the CO2 bottle works, which it usually doesn't, if the magnesium doesn't ignite, a lot of ifs. Danny's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Oh, Tom put a hand on the kid's shoulder. Listen to your instructors. Watch those temperature gauges every second, and if you smell magnesium burning sweet metallic smell, you bail out immediately. Don't try to be a hero. Yes, sir. Tom walked away, got in his car, drove home. That night, he could not sleep. He kept thinking about Danny Morrison, about the 20 other kids in that classroom, about the hundreds more going through training. Someone needed to keep them alive. Someone who understood the engines, who knew every failure mode, who could document the problems until someone in authority finally listened. The next morning, Tom called Harrison. Bob, I'm staying. Tear up my resignation. Someone needs to keep these kids alive. Harrison was silent for a moment. You sure the money is still on the table? Keep the money. Pay me my normal rate. But I have one condition. Name it. I document everything, every failure, every flaw, every near miss. And when I have enough evidence, you help me get it in front of people who can force Wright to fix their engines. Deal. Welcome back, Tom. Tom hung up, looked at the unsealed envelope on his desk, his resignation letter. He tore it up. This was going to kill him eventually. He knew that. The engines were too dangerous. The program was rushing too fast. Eventually, his luck would run out. But if he could document the failures, if he could save even a few of the kids going into combat, it would be worth it. He started a new file folder. Wrote R-3350 failure documentation on the tab. Page 1. The test flight was supposed to be routine. Climb to 10,000 feet. Test cowl flap operation. Monitor engine temperatures. Land. Jim's first flight. Tom wanted him on board because the kid understood engines better than most engineers with decades of experience. They got to 3,000 feet. The left inboard engine backfired, a massive bang that shook the entire airframe. Then flames poured from the cowl flaps bright orange against the gray Seattle sky. Jim's first thought was that they were going to die. Tom's voice came through the intercom impossibly calm. Engine fire number 2, Jim discharged the bottle. Jim hit the CO2 discharge switch. Carbon dioxide flooded the engine compartment. The fire kept burning. Magnesium does not care about CO2. It burns in almost any environment. Shutting down number 2, feathering the propeller. Tom's hands moved across controls with practiced precision. Throttle to idle, mixture to cutoff, propeller control to feather. The big 4-bladed propeller slowed, stopped aligned with the airflow to minimize drag. Tower Boeing X-2 has an engine fire. Declaring emergency. Request immediate landing. The tower cleared them. Tom banked the bomber back toward the field. The fire continued burning, but without fuel flow, it had nothing left to consume. It died out as they descended. Emergency landing. Fire trucks racing alongside as they rolled out. Ground crews swarming the aircraft before the propellers even stopped. Jim climbed out, legs shaking. His first flight. His first engine fire. Sullivan met him at the bottom of the crew ladder. Welcome to the B-29 program, kid. They traced the failure. An exhaust valve had cracked from thermal stress. White-hot combustion gas sprayed directly onto oil-soaked engine mounts. The oil ignited. Standard procedure would have been to scrub testing for the day, give maintenance time to do a thorough inspection. Tom wanted to go back up. Boeing's maintenance supervisor argued against it. Too risky. Fresh cylinder head installation had not been test run. Tom was insistent. We need to test the cowl flap modification. If we do not figure this out, kids in training are going to die when they encounter this at altitude. They installed new cylinder heads, ran the engine for 30 minutes on the ground. Everything looked normal. Jim watched Tom during the pre-flight. He looked tired, stressed. There was a sealed envelope on his desk in the flight office. Tom caught Jim looking at it. Just notes on the cowl flap problem, documentation for the file. But something in Tom's voice suggested he knew this flight was different. That night, Jim asked Sullivan about Tom. He quit 2 days ago, Sullivan said quietly, turned down a $50,000 bonus, said he was done risking his life. What changed his mind? He met some of the kids going through pilot training, realized nobody else understands these engines well enough to keep them alive. So he came back. Sullivan lit a cigarette. Tom is the best there is, but these engines are going to kill him eventually. He knows it. I know it. And now you know it too. The next morning, February 18th, Jim arrived at Boeing Field at 6 a.m. Tom was already there, doing a pre-flight walk around in the darkness, using a flashlight to inspect the engine that had caught fire yesterday. Jim joined him. Couldn't sleep, Tom said. Keep dreaming about fire. They walked around the bomber in silence. Tom checked every oil line, every compression fitting, every cowl flap actuator, looking for problems, hoping not to find any. The sunrise was gray and cold, typical Seattle February. Low clouds missed temperature just above freezing. First takeoff at 9:47 a.m. Climb out was normal. 4 Wright R-3350 engines roaring at maximum power, pulling the heavy bomber into the sky. Jim sat at his station surrounded by instruments, cylinder head temperatures, oil pressures, fuel flows, manifold pressures. His job was to monitor everything catch problems before they became catastrophic. Everything looked good until 3,000 feet. Same engine. Number 2, left inboard. Backfire. Flames. Jim's stomach dropped. Tom again impossibly calm. Engine fire number 2. Jim discharge bottle. Same procedure. CO2 release. Fire continues. Shutdown. Feather. Emergency return. This time they were on the ground in 8 minutes. Ground crews found the same problem. Another cracked exhaust valve. Different cylinder. Same failure mode. The maintenance supervisor was adamant this time. Tom, we are scrubbing for today. We need to inspect the entire engine, not just replace the failed cylinder. Tom looked at the supervisor, then at the bomber, then at Jim. How long to replace all 18-cylinder head assemblies? 2 hours, maybe 3. Tom nodded slowly. Do it. We go back up this afternoon. I need to test those cowl flaps in cruise configuration. The modification is supposed to solve the overheating problem. If it does not work, we need to know before production bombers start flying. The supervisor started to argue. Tom cut him off. People are dying in the Pacific right now. Marines, soldiers, sailors, they need this bomber. We are the only ones who can make it work, so we do the work. Jim spent the next 3 hours watching mechanics replace cylinder heads. 18 per engine, 72 total across all 4 power plants. The mechanics worked fast, but carefully. Every torque spec checked. Every compression, fitting tightened to precise values. 11:30 a.m. Engine run-ups complete. Everything looked normal. Tom found Jim in the crew room. I am adding you to the FLOAC crew manifest. I want you at the engineer station watching those temperatures the entire time. You have got the best eye for this I have seen. Jim felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. Yes, sir. 12:04 p.m., second takeoff of the day. The bomber lifted off, climbing through cold February air. Jim's eyes never left the instruments. Watching. Waiting for the first sign of trouble. Climb-out was clean. No fires. No anomalies. All 4 engines running smoothly. They leveled at 5,000 feet. This was the critical test. Tom needed to close the cowl flaps incrementally, measuring how cylinder head temperatures responded. The modification was supposed to improve cooling airflow. If it worked, production B-29s would get the same upgrade. If it didn't work, hundreds of bombers would fly into combat with engines prone to overheating. Tom began the test. Closing number 2 cowl flaps 10%. Jim watched the temperature gauges. Number 2 engine cylinders began climbing, slowly at first, 240 degrees Celsius, 250. Temps are rising on number 2. Roger, continuing at test, closing to 20%, 260 degrees, 270. Jim felt sweat on his palms despite the cold. Sir, temps are getting high. I see them, closing to 30%, 280, 290. This was bad. The modification was not working. If anything, it made cooling worse. Tom saw the same data. Opening cowl flaps, aborting test. We need to redesign the entire cooling system. He reached for the cowl flap control. Explosion, not a backfire, an actual explosion from deep inside the engine. The reduction gear housing the massive assembly that slowed the engine's high RPM to efficient propeller speed disintegrated. Planetary gears, carrier shafts, bearings, all blown apart by catastrophic mechanical failure. The 4-bladed propeller, no longer connected to the engine, tore free. 400 pounds of spinning metal smashed through the thin aluminum cowling. One blade sliced through the cockpit, killing the co-pilot instantly. Severed oil lines sprayed pressurized lubricant across the superheated engine block. The oil caught. Flames bloomed orange, spreading fast across the cowling. Then the magnesium ignited. The flames turned white. Blinding. Chemical fire at 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The firewall between the engine and the wing fuel tanks was made of thin stainless steel. It was never designed to handle this kind of heat. It began to glow red, then orange. 8 seconds later, it failed completely. Tom was fighting the controls. The bomber was rolling left from asymmetric thrust in the massive drag of a windmilling propeller stub. The control yoke shook so hard Jim could see it vibrating from his position behind the pilots. Jim watched through the observation window as the main wing spar began to glow. dull red at first, then bright orange. The aluminum structure was melting, losing strength with every passing second. Tom's voice came through the intercom one last time. "Everyone who can bail out now." A paw. "Jim, tell Boeing the cowl flaps do not work. Tell them the reduction gears are failing. Tell them." The wing spar failed. The entire left wing folded upward, hinging on the wing root where it attached to the fuselage. The B-29 rolled inverted and entered a flat spin, rotating like a falling leaf. Jim was thrown against the bulkhead. His head hit something hard. Pain exploded through his skull. Darkness swallowed everything. His last conscious thought was that he was about to die the same way Tom was dying, burned alive in a falling bomber because Wright Aeronautical could not build a reliable engine. Then nothing. Jim woke in hell, fire everywhere, smoke, screaming. He was lying in wreckage. His ribs hurt. His head was bleeding. But he was alive. The B-29 had plunged through the roof of the Fry and Company meatpacking plant. The building had collapsed. Wooden beams, brick walls, refrigeration equipment that all mixed with crushed aluminum from the bomber. Jim crawled through a gap in the fuselage. His hands were burned, not badly but enough to hurt. He pulled himself through twisted metal, feeling jagged edges cut his flight suit. Outside, chaos. Fire trucks, ambulances, police, hundreds of people standing in shocked silence. The meatpacking plant was gone, just rubble and flames. Jim could hear people trapped inside screaming. Fire crews were trying to get to them, but the heat was too intense. Jim looked back at the wreckage of the bomber. Tom Mitchell was still in the pilot seat, still strapped in. The cockpit had taken the full force of impact. He had died instantly. That was the only mercy. Jim collapsed on the wet pavement. Someone put a blanket over his shoulders. Paramedics asked him questions. He couldn't hear them. His ears were ringing from the explosion. All he could think about was Tom's last words. "Tell Boeing the cowl flaps don't work. Tell them." 3 days later, Jim woke up in Seattle General Hospital. Broken ribs, concussion, second-degree burns on both hands, cuts requiring 47 stitches. But alive. He was the only flight crew member who survived. Boeing CEO Robert Harrison visited that afternoon. Harrison was 51, a career aviation executive who had built Boeing from a small seaplane company into a major defense contractor. He looked exhausted, haunted. "Son, I am sorry about Tom, about everyone. We are doing everything we can to understand what happened." Jim's voice was hoarse. "I know what happened. The reduction gears failed. Catastrophic failure. The propeller tore free and severed the oil lines. Magnesium fire melted through the wing spar." Harrison nodded slowly. "That matches what our engineers found in the wreckage." Tom's last words. He said to tell you the cowl flaps do not work. The modification made cooling worse, not better. Harrison closed his eyes. "We will redesign them." "And the reduction gears?" "We are investigating the manufacturing process. Something went wrong at Wright's factory." Jim struggled to sit up, pain shooting through his ribs. "Sir, is the program over? Are they canceling the B-29? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "No, the Army is rushing it into production. First aircraft are already being built in Wichita. Wright is making thousands of engines." Jim stared at him. "But the engines are not ready. They are killing people. The war is not waiting for us to fix them. Marines are dying on Guadalcanal. The Navy cannot reach the Japanese home islands. We need a strategic bomber. The B-29 is the only option." "Then more crews are going to die." "Yes," Harrison's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, they are." After Harrison left, Jim lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. Tom Mitchell was dead. 10 crew members dead. 20 factory workers who were just eating lunch. A firefighter who responded to help. 32 people. All because Wright Aeronautical could not build an engine that worked. And the bombers were going into production anyway. Jim made a decision in that hospital bed. He would finish what Tom started. He would document every failure, figure out every flaw, and somehow, some way, he would force them to fix it. Tom died trying to save the program. Jim would not let that death be meaningless. 2 weeks later, Jim was released from the hospital. His first stop was Boeing Field. He needed Tom's notes, the documentation that Tom had been compiling. Harrison had already saved them, every page, every drawing, every temperature chart and oil pressure graph. Tom was meticulous, Harrison said, handing Jim the folder. He documented everything because he knew eventually someone would need this data. Jim opened the folder, page after page of technical detail. Tom had identified 5 critical flaws. Front-facing exhaust ports meant cooling air hit red-hot manifolds, first preheating the intake air and reducing cooling efficiency. Oil leaks everywhere from compression fittings that were not designed for high-vibration environments. Carburetor backfires that could ignite pooled fuel in the poorly designed induction system, which in turn could torch the magnesium supercharger case. Reduction gear failures from manufacturing defects that nobody at Wright was checking. Magnesium crankcase that burned unstoppably once ignited. Tom had identified all 5 problems, had recommended solutions for each one, had begged Wright to fix them before production started. Wright had ignored him. Before he left Seattle, one more visitor came to see Jim, Samuel Berg, 45 years old. Wright Aeronautical Factory representative, sent to Seattle to investigate the crash. Berg was defensive from the first moment. The engine design is sound. The problem was Boeing's installation and the cowl flap modification. Jim showed him Tom's notes, the oil leak documentation, the exhaust valve failure patterns, the reduction gear problems. Berg barely looked at them. Look, son, we are building 30,000 of these engines in the next 24 months. We don't have time to redesign. The production lines are already running. Jim felt anger rising in his chest. Then you are sending crews to die. You know the engines are flawed. You know they catch fire, and you are building them anyway. Berg stood up. The Army needs engines. We are providing engines. What happens after they leave our factory is not our responsibility. He walked out. Jim sat alone in the hospital room holding Tom's notes. Wright knew, Boeing knew, the Army knew. And they were going ahead anyway because the war could not wait. Somewhere in the Pacific, Marines were fighting and dying on jungle islands. Sailors were burning and sinking ships. The Japanese held everything from Burma to the Gilbert Islands. America needed a bomber that could reach Tokyo. The B-29 was that bomber. Even if it killed the men who flew it, Jim made his vow that day. He would train every flight engineer he could, teach them everything Tom had learned, give them the knowledge to survive. And somehow he would force Wright Aeronautical to fix their engines, before more kids died burning in magnesium fires over the Pacific. Tom Mitchell's last words echoed in his memory. Tell Boeing the cowl flaps don't work. Jim would tell them, he would tell everyone who would listen, and he would not stop until they fixed it. April 1943. Jim received new orders. Report to Salina Army Airfield, Kansas. Assignment B-29 Flight Engineer Instructor. His job was to train the next generation of flight engineers, teach them how to keep the Wright R-3350 from killing them. The landscape was familiar when he arrived. Endless wheat fields, flat horizon, sky so big it made you feel small. This was home country. The base was chaos. B-29s everywhere still smelling of fresh paint and hydraulic fluid. Ground crews learning maintenance procedures. Pilots transitioning from B-17s and B-24s, struggling with an airplane that handled nothing like what they were used to. And flight engineers, 24 young men ages 19 to 23. Farm boys, factory workers, mechanics. Kids who scored high on aptitude tests and got assigned to the most complex bomber ever built. Colonel Paul Richards commanded the training program. 52 years old World War I fighter pilot, a man who had seen too many young pilots die from inadequate training. He met Jim in his office. Carter, I read the crash report from Seattle. I am sorry about Mitchell. He came back specifically to help these kids. That took guts. Yes, sir. Richards opened a folder. In the last 3 months, we have lost 8 B-29s in stateside training. Not combat, training, 64 men dead. Every single loss was engine-related. Fires, mechanical failures, crashes on takeoff when engines quit. Jim felt sick. 64 men. The engineers are killing more people in training than they will in combat. Your job is to teach these kids how to keep the R-3350 from murdering them. Think you can do that? Jim thought of Tom's notes. 147 pages of documentation. Every failure mode, every warning sign. Yes, sir, I can do that. His first class assembled in a maintenance hangar that afternoon. 24 flight engineers. Most looked terrified. They had heard the stories, the engines that caught fire, the bombers that crashed, the magnesium fires that could not be extinguished. Jim stood in front of them next to a Wright R-3350 engine mounted on a training stand. My name is Jim Carter. I was on the B-29 that crashed in Seattle. I watched Tom Mitchell die because this engine failed. Tom came back from retirement to help you. He died trying to save this program. I am going to finish what he started. I am going to teach you how to survive these things. He pointed at the cylinder heads. When cylinder head temperature hits 260 degrees Celsius, you have maybe 90 seconds before an exhaust valve fails. Maybe. You watch those gauges every second. You see 260, you tell the pilot to reduce power and open the cowl flaps. You do not wait. You do not hope it gets better. You act. He moved to the reduction gear housing. Oil pressure drops below 25 psi. The reduction gears are starving for lubrication. They will grenade in minutes. Catastrophic failure. Propeller tears free. You shut down that engine immediately. He tapped at the magnesium crankcase. If you smell magnesium burning, sweet smell metallic, the fire is already through the firewall. You have seconds before the wing spar fails. You discharge the CO2 bottle, knowing it probably will not work. 87% of the time it does not work, and you prepare to bail out. One student raised his hand. Danny Morrison, 20 years old, dark hair, eager expression, West Virginia accent, the same kid Tom had met in the hallway. The reason Tom came back. Sir, my uncle flew B-17s. He said they are reliable. Why are these engines so bad? Jim looked at Danny, saw the kid Tom had wanted to save. Because Wright Aeronautical rushed them into production before they were ready. Because the Army needed a bomber that could reach Japan. Because the war could not wait. These engines have 5 fundamental design flaws. I am going to teach you all 5. And I am going to teach you how to work around them. Because we cannot fix the design. But we can learn to survive it. The training was brutal. Jim made them memorize every warning sign, every procedure, every emergency checklist. He ran them through simulations until they could shut down a burning engine in their sleep. But simulations were not reality. July 14th, 1943. Training flight over Kansas wheat fields. Beautiful summer day, clear sky, light wind. Student flight engineer Tommy Walsh, 19 years old, from Akron, Ohio, scored 94 on his aptitude test. Smart kid, careful, methodical. The B-29 took off at 2:15 p.m. Maximum gross weight training mission, simulating combat loadout. Engine fire on climb out. Number 3, right inboard. Walsh was at the engineer station. He saw the fire warning light, heard the alarm, and he froze. Later, investigators said it was only 3 seconds. 3 seconds of hesitation before he hit the CO2 discharge. 3 seconds was too long. The fire spread, the magnesium case caught. White flames ate through the firewall. Wing spar began to fail. The bomber was at 400 feet. Not enough altitude to recover. Not enough altitude to bail out. It cartwheeled into a cornfield 3 miles from the runway. Hit inverted. Fuel tanks ruptured. Fireball visible from the control tower. All 11 crew members killed instantly. Jim watched from the tower, saw the smoke column rising into the summer sky, saw fire trucks racing across the field, knowing they were already too late. That night, he went through Walsh's personal effects, standard procedure before shipping them to the family. Clothing, a watch, a Bible, letters, 1 letter to his mother, unsealed. Walsh had been writing it the night before. Mom, I am scared. The engines catch fire a lot. The instructors say it is normal, but it does not feel normal. But I will do my duty. I will make you proud. Jim sat in the empty barracks holding that letter. Walsh had done everything right, followed every procedure. Just 3 seconds too slow. And now he was dead. This had to stop. August 1943. Jim received orders. Report to Wright Aeronautical Factory, Woodridge, New Jersey. Army liaison. And investigate why field engines were failing so fast. But Jim was about to discover the problem was worse than anyone imagined. The engines were not just flawed, they were being built by people who did not care. The factory was enormous. Multiple buildings, assembly lines running 24 hours a day, thousands of workers. The sound of machinery was constant deafening. Factory supervisor Dutch Kramer met him at the gate. 51 years old, chain smoker, 3 packs a day, ex-machinist who worked his way up to management. Kramer gave Jim the tour. We are running 3 shifts, 24/7. Management wants 150 engines per week. We are hitting 130, not fast enough for the pencil pushers in New York. Jim watched the production line. Workers assembling reduction gears, installing cylinder heads, torquing compression fittings. Many looked exhausted. Some were clearly drunk. Your workers look rough. Kramer lit another cigarette. We are paying 75 cents an hour. Shipyards 3 blocks away are paying $1.25. We get whoever is left. The desperate ones, the ones with no other options. The drunks. Yeah, the drunks. They walked to the reduction gear assembly station. Critical component, planetary gears that reduced engine RPM from 2,800 to propeller speed around 1,600. Dozens of precision parts. Each one had to be torqued to exact specifications. Jim watched a young worker, maybe 18, installing gear carriers. The kid was swaying slightly, pupils dilated, definitely intoxicated. Jim stepped closer. What torque spec are you using for those carrier bolts? The kid looked at him with unfocused eyes. Who the fuck are you, Army Air Forces? Answer the question. 50 foot-pounds? Spec is 65. The kid laughed. Yeah, well, foreman says we gotta make quota. 65 takes too long. Jim felt anger burning in his chest. He checked other gear assemblies on the line. Randomly selected 6. 4 were under-torqued. He confronted the line supervisor. Young guy, maybe 25, clipboard in hand, looking stressed. Your gear assemblies are not meeting spec. We are behind quota. Those gears are going into combat engines. If they fail, crews die. The supervisor looked around nervously. You need to take this up with the plant manager. Jim did. Plant manager Edward Walsh, 58, career factory administrator, office on the 3rd floor overlooking the production floor. Comfortable, air-conditioned, as far removed from the heat and noise below as possible. Walsh barely looked up from his paperwork when Jim entered. Make it quick. I have a conference call with corporate in 10 minutes. Your reduction gears are not being torqued to specification. 40% failure rate on random sampling. Now Walsh looked up. Who authorized you to inspect my line? Army Air Forces. I am investigating field failures. Your gears are failing in combat, catastrophically. Walsh closed his folder. Mr. Carter, we have contracts, production quotas. Curtiss Wright Corporation headquarters in Rockefeller Plaza expects 150 engines per week from this facility. We are already behind. You want me to slow production and explain to corporate that we are missing targets. I want you to stop killing pilots with defective parts. Get off my factory floor. Jim did not move. I am filing a formal report with the War Department. This factory is producing substandard engines. It is criminal negligence. Walsh picked up his phone. Security, I have someone who needs to be escorted out. 2 security guards arrived. Big men, ex-cops. They walked Jim to the gate. Kramer found him in the parking lot 20 minutes later. Kid, you got guts, but you just made an enemy. I don't care, Kramer lit another cigarette. You should. Walsh has friends in corporate, and corporate has friends in Washington. Your report is going to disappear into a filing cabinet somewhere. Then I will write another one, and another, until someone listens. Kramer studied him for a moment. You really think you can change this? Tom Mitchell died because of bad reduction gears. Tommy Walsh died in training because the engines catch fire. Danny Morrison is about to deploy to combat with engines built by drunk workers who do not follow specs. Yeah, I think I need to try. Kramer nodded slowly. The best engines come from Chrysler, Dodge Chicago plant. They are building R-3350s under license. Their quality control is 10 times better than ours. Their workers are sober. Their foremen check torque specs. If you want good engines, that is where they come from. Why is Wright so much worse? Because Wright management does not care. They are making money either way. Cost plus contracts. The more engines they build, the more profit they make. Quality is secondary. Jim thanked him and left. The pattern was clear now. This was not just design flaws. This was systemic corruption. A company more concerned with profit than the lives of the men who depended on their engines. September 1943. Danny Morrison completed flight engineer training. Top of his class, Jim personally recommended him for combat duty. October, Jim and Danny both assigned to the 444th Bomb Group deploying to India. The flight from the United States to India was 12,000 miles, island hopping across the South Atlantic. Brazil, West Africa, Middle East. Final destination, an airfield carved out of jungle outside Calcutta. Their bomber B-29 serial number 42-6256. Crew nicknamed it Kansas Belle. Painted nose art, a wheat field with a girl in a sunbonnet. Pilot Captain Robert Hayes, 26 years old. Crop duster from Nebraska before the war. 5,000 hours flying time. Calm under pressure. 10 crew total. All under 25 except Jim and Hayes. Jim's station was behind the pilots. Wall of instruments. 4 engines worth of cylinder head temperatures, oil pressures, fuel flows, manifold pressures, cowl flap positions, fire warning lights. Danny Morrison was his assistant, learning the job by watching Jim work. The mission briefings were sobering. The plan was to bomb Japan by flying over the Himalayas to forward bases in China. Pilots called it flying the hump, the most dangerous air route in the world. But the real enemy was not the mountains. It was not the Japanese. It was the engines. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the Japanese were preparing. Tokyo, August 1943, Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Yamamoto sat in his office reviewing intelligence reports. He was 42 years old, career naval officer, expert in American capabilities. The reports described a new American bomber. Very large, 4 engines, long range, designated B-29. But the reports also described problems: engine fires, training crashes, mechanical failures. Yamamoto briefed his staff. The Americans are rushing their new bomber into production. They are making the same mistake they always make: quantity over quality, speed over preparation. His aide asked, "Should we be concerned about this aircraft?" Yamamoto smiled. "Their engines catch fire more often than our anti-aircraft guns hit them." "No, we will be ready. The Americans are predictable. They will attack at high altitude in daylight. Our defenses are prepared for that." He did not know what was coming. December 18th, 1943, first combat mission. Target Rangoon, Burma. Railroad yards. 98 B-29s took off from airfields across India. Jim's bomber was in the formation. Hayes at the controls. Jim at the engineer station. Danny beside him watching, learning. The briefing said, expect light resistance. Japanese fighters and flak, but nothing the B-29 could not handle. The briefing did not mention the real enemy. Climbing through 8,000 feet, Jim watched his instruments. Cylinder head temperatures already in the yellow zone. 240 degrees Celsius. 250, Jim on the intercom. "Skipper, temps are high across the board. Recommend we do not close cowl flaps." Hayes replied, "Cannot maintain formation with flaps open. Too much drag, we will fall behind." "Sir, we close those flaps, we risk engine fires." "Just watch the temps. Call out if anything spikes." This was the impossible dance. The physics that made the B-29 nearly impossible to fly. Open the cowl flaps, cooling, air flows through temperatures, drop, but drag increases. The bomber slows, falls behind formation, becomes vulnerable to fighters. Close the cowl flaps, drag decreases, speed increases, formation, position maintained. But temperatures spike, exhaust valves start failing, fires start. There was no good answer. Jim made 217 cowl flap adjustments during the 8-hour mission, opening them when temps climbed too high, closing them when the bomber fell behind. A constant battle against physics. Look at any photograph of B-29 formations over Japan. Every single bomber has cowl flaps partially open. Every single one, because they could not close them without overheating. The bombing run was successful, minimal enemy action, One B-29 shot down by Japanese fighters, 6 damaged by flak. But the real casualties came on the way home, 4 hours from base. Jim noticed oil pressure dropping on number 2 engine, left inboard, the cursed position, the same engine that killed Tom Mitchell. Skipper oil pressure dropping on 2, down to 30 psi. Hayes checked his instruments. How fast is it dropping? 5 psi per minute. Reduction gears. If the pressure keeps dropping, the gears will fail. Hayes made the decision. We shut it down now or we lose the engine catastrophically. Shutting down number 2. Throttle to idle, mixture to cutoff, propeller to feather. The engine wound down. Oil pressure dropped to 0. They had shut it down just in time. Or so they thought. Grinding noise. Deep inside the engine. Metal on metal. The sound every flight engineer dreads. The reduction gears were already failing. Catastrophic failure. Planetary gears shattering. Carrier shafts breaking. Shrapnel punched through the gear housing. Punctured oil lines that were still pressurized from the other 3 running engines. Hot oil sprayed across the superheated engine block. Atomized, mixed with air. Ignition. The fire started differently this time. Not the sudden white flash of Tom's crash. This was insidious. Orange flames crawling across oil-soaked metal, spreading, growing, feeding on the constant spray of fresh lubricant. Then the magnesium caught. The flames turned brilliant white, unbearable to look at directly. Chemical fury at 5,600 degrees. Jim hit the fire warning. Fire on 2 Danny discharge bottle. Danny Morrison moved fast. He had trained for this, ran to the manual discharge station, hit the lever. Carbon dioxide flooded the engine compartment. The fire continued burning. 87% failure rate. Jim watched through the observation window. Magnesium burning so bright it hurt to look at. The wing spar visible through the flames, starting to glow red. Skipper, wing spar is going to fail. We need to bail out. Hayes fighting controls. Over Burma jungle at night, that is a death sentence. I can get us home. Danny at his station, fire extinguisher in hand. Sir, I can see the spar. It is melting. The flames ate through the firewall, reached the area where wing fuel tanks attached to the fuselage. If those tanks ruptured, everyone died. Hayes made the call. Everyone aft of the wing bail out now. Forward crew prepare to abandon aircraft. 6 crew members in the rear section opened the escape hatches, jumped into darkness, 3,000 feet over jungle. They would be lucky to survive the landing, luckier still to evade capture. 4 crew stayed with Hayes, trying to save the bomber, trying to make it home. Danny Morrison stayed at the fire station, still trying to manually smother the flames with an extinguisher, fighting a chemical reaction that could not be stopped with foam. Jim watched through smoke, Danny's face visible in the glow of burning magnesium. That eager kid from West Virginia, coal miner's son, the kid Tom had met in the hallway. The reason Tom came back, wanted to serve, wanted to do his duty. The wing spar failed at 4,000 feet, the same failure mode that killed Tom Mitchell. Aluminum structure melting through, main spar giving way under aerodynamic loads. The left wing folded upward. The B-29 rolled inverted and entered a spin. Jim screamed into the intercom, "Danny, get out! Get to the hatch!" But Danny could not reach it. The wing fold had jammed the escape hatch, bent the fuselage. Danny was trapped in the rear section with no way out. Jim made it to the forward escape hatch. Hayes was still fighting controls, trying to recover from an unrecoverable spin. The aircraft commander's curse, never giving up even when physics says you are already dead. Jim jumped at 2,000 feet, pulled the ripcord, parachute opened. He swung under the canopy, watching Kansas Belle spiral into a hillside 3 miles away. The impact, the fireball, orange and red against the night sky. Visible for miles, Danny Morrison, 20 years old, Robert Hayes, 26 years old, 2 gunners, a navigator, all dead because a drunk worker in New Jersey had not torqued reduction gear bolts to specification. Jim landed in a rice paddy, knee-deep in water, searched by British Army patrols the next morning, evacuated to the base in India. Survivor again, the only one. January 1944. Jim sat in a tent at the India airfield writing his incident report. Detailed description of the reduction gear failure, how the oil sprayed, how the magnesium ignited, how the wing spar melted exactly like Tom Mitchell's crash. He included everything, submitted it up the chain of command. Response came back 3 days later. Incident classified, continue operations. Jim read those 3 words over and over. Continue operations. Danny Morrison was dead. Tommy Walsh was dead. Tom Mitchell was dead. Hundreds of others. And the response was to continue operations. They were covering it up. The Army knew the engines were defective. Wright knew they were shipping bad parts. Boeing knew the design was flawed. And they were continuing operations because the war could not wait. Jim made a decision. He requested emergency leave, flew back to the United States, went directly to Washington, D.C., War Department building, Pentagon still under construction, Jim in his dress uniform with 3 rows of ribbons, survivor of 2 crashes, combat veteran. He demanded to speak with General Henry Arnold, commanding General Army Air Forces. He got as far as Colonel Thomas Parker, Arnold's aide. Parker was 45, West Point, career officer. He looked tired. Sergeant Carter, I read your report. I am sorry about your losses. Sir, with respect, I do not want sympathy. I want action. Wright Aeronautical is shipping defective engines. Their factory workers are drunk. Their quality control is non-existent. And crews are dying because of it. Parker opened a folder. You are not the first person to complain. In fact, you are about the 50th, which is why there is already a congressional investigation underway. Jim felt hope for the first time in months. Investigation. Summer of '43, General Arnold ordered it. Committee has been investigating Wright for 6 months. Their findings. Parker paused. Let me just say you are going to be called to testify. March 1944. Jim stood in a hearing room in the Capitol building. Committee members sat behind a long table. William Brennan, future Supreme Court Justice. William O'Dwyer, future Mayor of New York. James McDonald, founder of McDonald Aircraft. They had spent 6 months investigating Wright Aeronautical. Their findings were devastating. Brennan opened the session. Sergeant Carter, you have submitted multiple reports about defective Wright R-3350 engines. Can you summarize your findings for this committee? Jim spoke for 20 minutes. Describe Tom Mitchell's crash, how Tom came back from retirement to help the kids, the training fatalities, Danny Morrison burning alive over Burma, the drunk workers at the New Jersey factory, the under-torqued reduction gears. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Brennan called his next witness, manager from Chrysler Dodge Chicago plant, the facility building R-3350s under license from Wright. The manager testified. We noticed unusually high failure rates in Wright-supplied planetary gear carriers. We measured hole tolerances. They were off by 0.008 inches. How did this happen? We traced it back to an automated drill press at Wright's New Jersey plant. The press was supposed to bore holes for a dozen planetary gear carrier shafts simultaneously, but the press was misaligned, had been misaligned for 14 months. Brennan leaned forward. How many defective gear sets were produced? Approximately 8,000. The room erupted, reporters scribbling notes, committee members conferring in shocked whispers. 8,000 defective reduction gear sets, already installed in engines, in bombers, in combat, killing crews like Danny Morrison. Brennan called Wright executives to testify. Vice President of Production. Confident. Dismissive. We have rigorous quality control procedures. Brennan produced a document. This is an internal Wright Aeronautical Memorandum dated October 1943 from one of your engineers to management. I will read the relevant section. He adjusted his glasses. Reduction gear failures in field engines running 300% above acceptable rate. Recommend immediate production, halt for investigation. Brennan looked at the VP. What was management's response? The VP shifted uncomfortably. I would have to review our files. Allow me to save you the trouble. Brennan produced another document. This is management's response. Quote, maintain production schedule. Field modifications will address issues. End quote. Brennan set the papers down. Field modifications. You mean having 20-year-old flight engineers fix your mistakes while being shot at over Japan? The VP had no answer. Brennan called Jim back to the stand. Sergeant Carter, in your experience, could these problems have been prevented? Jim thought of Tom's 147 pages of documentation, the warnings that were ignored, the recommendations that were dismissed. Sir Tom Mitchell identified every single one of these flaws months before his death. He came back from retirement specifically to document them. He died trying to save this program. Danny Morrison died because Wright could not be bothered to check their drill press alignment. How many more kids have to die before someone forces them to fix this? The hearing room was silent. Wright executives stared at the table. The committee recommended criminal prosecution. The War Department refused. Could not afford to disrupt production. Compromise Army oversight of Wright factories. Chrysler quality procedures adopted across all production lines. Better workforce training. Manual drilling of gear carrier holes until automated systems could be fixed. But the fundamental design flaws remained. Front-facing exhaust ports still spraying heat at cylinders. Magnesium crankcases still catastrophically flammable. Carburetors still prone to backfires. Oil still leaking from poorly designed fittings. Jim met with Brennan after the hearings. You did everything you could. You exposed the corruption, forced some changes. Jim looked at the Capitol dome through the window. It is not enough. The engines are still dangerous. More crews are going to die. What would you have us do? Stop the war. Jim had no answer. April 1944, Jim received new orders. Report to 21st Bomber Command. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The war was moving closer to Japan. Marines and Army had captured island bases within striking distance. 1,500 miles. No Himalayas to cross. But the engines were still killing more men than the enemy. Someone had to figure out how to stop it, before more kids like Danny Morrison burned alive over the Pacific. But in the Pacific, one general was about to gamble everything on a radical idea. An idea so crazy it might actually work. November 1944. Jim Carter arrived on Saipan. The Mariana Islands had been captured 3 months earlier. Marines storming beaches, Army fighting through jungles. Thousands of casualties to take 3 tiny specks of coral and volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific. But those 3 islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, put B-29 bombers within 1,500 miles of Tokyo. No Himalayas to cross. No flying over enemy territory for hours just to reach the target area. Straight shot across the ocean to the Japanese home islands. 21st Bomber Command was building the largest airbase complex in the world. Runways carved out of coral, Quonset huts for 10,000 men, fuel storage tanks, bomb dumps, maintenance facilities, and B-29s. Hundreds of them. Silver bombers gleaming in the tropical sun. The commanding officer was General Charles Henderson, 38 years old. Youngest general in the Army Air Forces. Aggressive, innovative. A man who did not believe in doing things the way the manual said if the manual was wrong. Henderson called a staff meeting the day Jim arrived. The conference room was hot. No air conditioning. Fans pushing humid air around. 20 officers crowded around a table covered with maps and loss statistics. Henderson stood at the head of the table, looked exhausted. He had been flying missions himself, leading from the front, trying to understand why his command was bleeding aircraft at an unsustainable rate. He pointed at a graph on the wall. Gentlemen, we are losing this war, not to the Japanese, to Curtiss Wright Corporation. The graph showed loss rates, 5.2% per mission, sustainable for maybe 6 months. Then the command would be combat ineffective, out of aircraft, out of crews. But the breakdown was what mattered. 30% of losses were from enemy action. Fighters, flak, combat damage. 70% were operational. Engine fires, mechanical failures, crashes on return. Henderson let that sink in. We are flying high-altitude daylight precision bombing. 30,000 feet. The engines are struggling. Temperatures are extreme. We are losing 2 bombers to mechanical failure for every one the Japanese shoot down. He looked around the room. We are going to stop flying by the book. The room erupted. Officers talking over each other. Henderson raised his hand for silence. We go low, 5,000 to 7,000 feet. We attack at night, and we strip the defensive guns. The objections were immediate and loud. Sir, that puts us within range of every anti-aircraft gun in Japan. Night attack, Japanese fighters will slaughter us in searchlights. Strip the guns, we will be defenseless. Henderson waited for the noise to die down. Then he turned to Jim. Carter, you have been fighting these engines since Tom Mitchell died in Seattle. You testified to Congress about the design flaws. You watched men burn over Burma. Tell me, will low altitude reduce engine failures? Every eye in the room turned to Jim. He thought about the physics. Lower altitude meant denser air, better cooling, less strain on superchargers, cooler running cylinder heads. He thought about weight. Stripping guns meant 7,000 pounds less. Less weight meant less power required. Less power meant cooler engines. Better performance if an engine failed. He thought about Tom Mitchell, Danny Morrison, Tommy Walsh, hundreds of others dead from engine fires. Sir, lower altitude drops cylinder head temperatures about 40 degrees. Less weight means we can maintain safe airspeed on 3 engines if one fails. I think it cuts operational losses by 2/3. Henderson nodded. Then we do it. I would rather lose aircraft to flak than watch them burn from engine fires we cannot control. The staff officers were still objecting. This violated every doctrine, every training manual, every principle of strategic bombing. Henderson cut them off. I am not asking for permission. I am informing you. First mission goes forward at March 9th. Start planning. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the Japanese were confident. Tokyo, February 1945. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters. Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Yamamoto was briefing his staff on American bomber tactics. He had been tracking B-29 formations for months, recording their approach patterns, their altitudes, their formations. The data was consistent. The Americans attack at 25 to 30,000 feet, daylight, tight formations for mutual defensive fire. Their tactics are predictable. He pointed at a map showing Japanese air defenses around Tokyo. Our heavy flak batteries are calibrated for high altitude, 88mm guns, 127mm guns, all positioned to engage bombers at 25,000 feet and above. His aide asked, "What about night attacks?" Yamamoto dismissed the idea. The Americans do not have the training for night formation flying. Their pilots are inadequate. They will continue daylight attacks because that is all they know how to do. He was confident. The defenses were ready. The Americans were predictable. He was wrong. March 1945. Saipan. The modifications began. Ground crews working around the clock, stripping defensive guns from 334 B-29 bombers, removing armor plating, cutting weight anywhere possible. The crews were terrified. Jim heard it in every conversation. Pilots arguing with the mechanics, gunners questioning orders. Everyone understanding they were about to fly into the most heavily defended airspace in the world with no way to shoot back. Jim's bomber was B-29 serial number 44-70155. Crew called it Second Chance. Painted nose art. A phoenix rising from flames. Named for Jim's survival of 2 crashes. The pilot was Major Richard Sullivan, 27 years old, former airline pilot from American Airlines. 5,000 hours, calm, professional. Sullivan found Jim in the crew quarters the night before the mission. "Carter, you really think flying at 5,000 feet into Tokyo is safer than high altitude?" Jim looked at him. "Dick, I have seen these engines kill more men than the Japanese ever will." "Yeah, I think it is safer." Sullivan sat down on the bunk. "They are loading us with incendiaries, M69 clusters. We are going to burn Tokyo." "I know. 16 million people live there." "I know that too." Sullivan was quiet for a moment. "You ever wonder if we are the bad guys?" Jim thought about Tom Mitchell, about Danny Morrison burning alive over Burma, about Tommy Walsh in the Kansas cornfield, about 8,000 defective reduction gears that Wright Aeronautical shipped knowing they would fail. The Japanese started this war. They can end it any time by surrendering. Until then, we do our job. Sullivan nodded. "Wheels up at 0015. Get some sleep." But Jim did not sleep. He lay in the bunk thinking about what was coming. 334 bombers, 1,650 tons of incendiaries. Low altitude, no formations, individual aircraft attacking in streams. Total chaos designed to overwhelm defenses. and engines that would finally maybe run cool enough to survive. March 10th, 1945, 00:15 hours. Second Chance lifted off from Saipan's north runway. Jim at the engineer station, watching cylinder head temperatures during the climb-out. For the first time in 18 months of flying B-29s, the numbers look good. Climbing through 5,000 feet, cylinder heads at 220 degrees Celsius, comfortably in the green zone. Oil pressures normal, no warning lights. They leveled at 7,000 feet for the cruise to Japan. Jim kept monitoring, waiting for temperatures to spike, waiting for the inevitable fire, but it did not come. The engines ran cool, steady, almost peaceful. Sullivan noticed it too. "Carter, these temps look better than I have ever seen. Lower altitude, denser air, better cooling. This is what the engines should have been doing it all along." The flight to Japan took 6 hours. Jim made maybe 20 cowflap adjustments, compared to the 200 plus he usually made. The engines were happy at this altitude. 01:30 hours. First bombers reached Tokyo. Jim looked out the observation window. The city spread below them. Lights everywhere despite the blackout orders. 16 million people sleeping. Not for long. The lead aircraft dropped their incendiaries. M69 clusters breaking apart, scattering bomblets across wooden neighborhoods. Each bomblet was a 6-pound tube of jellied gasoline, ignited by white phosphorus fuses. The fires started small, individual buildings, but the wind was strong, 15 knots from the northwest. The fires spread, merged, grew. By the time Second Chance reached the target area, Tokyo was already burning. Sullivan on the intercom. "Jesus Christ, the whole city is on fire." Jim saw it through the window, a sea of flames stretching to the horizon, orange and red, smoke columns rising thousands of feet. The thermal updrafts hit them hard. The bomber bucked and jolted, like flying through a thunderstorm. But it was not weather. It was heat from a city burning below them. Japanese searchlights swept the sky, dozens of them, trying to illuminate targets for the flak guns. But the lights were aimed too high, calibrated for bombers at 25,000 feet. The B-29s at 7,000 feet were below the search beams. Flak bursts appeared, black puffs against the glow. But most were 5,000 feet too high. The gunners were firing at where they expected bombers to be, not where they actually were. Second Chance dropped its load, 2 tons of incendiaries adding to the conflagration below. Sullivan banked away. Heading home, Carter engine status. Jim scanned his instruments. All 4 engines running normally. Temperatures good. Oil pressures good. No fires. All engines normal, skipper. For the first time in his entire B-29 career, Jim was not fighting an engine fire. The return flight was smooth. They landed at Saipan at 0820, dawn breaking, sun rising over the Pacific. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft, inspecting engines, looking for damage. The crew chief called up to Jim. "Carter, get down here. You need to see this." Jim climbed down. The crew chief pointed at the engine cowlings. "These are the cleanest cowlings I have ever seen after a mission. Usually they are black with cooked oil, but these are almost clean." Jim understood. Lower altitude, cooler running. The engines had not overheated enough to cook the oil that was constantly leaking from fittings. No oil burning, no carbon buildup. Henderson met the returning crews, counting aircraft. 14 missing, out of 334. 4.1% loss rate. But the breakdown was different this time. Most of the 14 were combat losses. Flak, thermal turbulence from the firestorm. 1 mid-air collision in the darkness. Only 2 were engine failures. 2 out of 334. Operational loss rate 0.59%, down from 70%. Henderson found Jim. "Carter, you were right. We have been killing ourselves trying to fly these things the wrong way." Jim thought about Tom Mitchell's last words. "Tell Boeing the cowl flaps don't work." Tom was right. At high altitude, you could not close the cowl flaps without overheating. The modification Boeing tried was supposed to fix that. It did not. It made things worse. But at low altitude, it did not matter. The engines ran cool enough with flaps partially open. Physics finally worked in their favor instead of against them. The intelligence reports came in over the following days. Tokyo firestorm killed an estimated 100,000 people. 16 square miles of the city destroyed. 1 million homeless. 14 B-29s lost. 440 airmen lost. A horrific price. But compare it to the high-altitude missions. 5% loss rate, 70% operational. That would have been 17 bombers lost, 120 of them to engine failures. Henderson's gamble worked, not because it was safer. It was not. Flying into flak range was dangerous, but it was less dangerous than engines that caught fire at 30,000 feet with no way to extinguish them. April 1945. Wright Aeronautical finally implemented the solution they should have designed from the beginning: direct fuel injection. Instead of a carburetor mixing fuel and air in the intake manifold, the new system sprayed fuel directly into the combustion chamber. Each cylinder got its own injector, precise metering, no fuel pooling in the induction system. The benefits were immediate. Backfires eliminated entirely. No fuel in the intake meant nothing to ignite when a cylinder misfired. The raw fuel spray also provided evaporative cooling. Cylinder head temperatures dropped another 15 degrees. But the system came late. Only the newest production B-29s received it. Most of the fleet was still flying with carburetors. July 1945. Jim received new orders. Report to 509th Composite Bomb Group, Tinian Island. Special assignment. Classified. The 509th was different from other B-29 units. Smaller, only 15 aircraft. But those aircraft were modified beyond anything Jim had seen. Silver plate B-29s, stripped down, enhanced engines, specialized bomb bay. The group commander was Colonel Paul Tibbets, 30 years old, best B-29 pilot in the Air Forces, handpicked for this mission, whatever this mission was. Tibbets briefed Jim personally. "Carter, you have more experience keeping R-3350s alive than anyone in the Pacific. That is why you are here. We are flying the most important mission of the war. I cannot tell you what it is yet, but I can tell you this. We cannot afford an engine failure, not on this mission. Sir, what modifications do these aircraft have? Direct fuel injection on all engines, upgraded reduction gears from Chrysler, enhanced oil cooling. These are the most reliable R-3350s ever built." Jim understood. Whatever they were carrying, it was too important to risk to engine failure. August 6, 1945. Jim was assigned to the backup crew, not flying the primary mission, but standing by in case the lead aircraft had problems. He watched from Tinian as Enola Gay lifted off. Silver plate B-29, direct injection engines, carrying a single bomb that weighed 9,000 pounds. The mission took 7 hours, radio silence the entire time. Jim waited with the rest of the backup crew, wondering what was happening over Japan. Then the report came in. Hiroshima, 1 bomb, 1 city, gone. Estimates varied. 70,000 dead immediately. More from radiation in the following weeks. Jim tried to comprehend it. 1 bomb, 1 airplane. More destruction than 334 B-29s had delivered over Tokyo. Enola Gay landed at Tinian. Jim inspected the engines. All 4 running perfectly. Direct fuel injection. No fires, no failures. Just flawless performance. August 9th. Nagasaki. Same result. 1 bomb, 1 city. 40,000 dead. August 15th. Japan surrendered. The war was over. Across the Pacific in Tokyo, Lieutenant Commander Yamamoto sat in the ruins of Naval Headquarters. The building had survived the firestorm in March. Barely. But the surrender was final. He read the reports. American bombers attacking at low altitude. At night. Tactics the Japanese defenses were not prepared for. The certainty that Americans were predictable had been wrong. And now these atomic bombs. Weapons that made everything else obsolete. Yamamoto knew the truth. Japan had lost because they underestimated their enemy. Assumed the Americans would fight by the old rules. Assumed their engines would keep failing. The Americans changed, adapted, found solutions. Japan did not. September 1945. Jim compiled final statistics. Total B-29 losses in combat, 414 aircraft. Shot down by enemy 147, 35.5%. Lost to operational causes 267, 64.5%. Wright R-3350 engines averaged 265 hours between major overhaul during the war. Many were simply scrapped and replaced, mountains of destroyed engines at every Pacific base. But the number that haunted Jim was simpler: 267 crews, roughly 2,670 men, dead not from enemy action, but from engines that should never have been put into production. Tom Mitchell, Tommy Walsh, Danny Morrison, Bob Hayes, 2,666 others. All because Wright Aeronautical rushed production, because corporate executives cared more about profit than lives, because drunk workers assembled critical parts, because quality control was ignored, and because the war could not wait. October 1945. Jim returned to the United States. His first stop was Seattle, Boeing Field, the site where Tom Mitchell died. There was a memorial now, small plaque, bronze, mounted on a stone near where the Fry and Company building had stood. In memory of Tom Mitchell and crew, B-29 crash, February 18, 1943. Their sacrifice advanced aviation safety. Jim stood there for a long time, thinking about Tom's last words. The 147 pages of documentation, the warnings that were ignored until it was too late to save hundreds of crews. Robert Harrison, Boeing CEO, found him there. "Jim, I heard you were back." "Mr. Harrison, Tom would be proud of you. You finished what he started. He came back to help those kids and you carried that forward. You exposed the problems, forced changes, saved lives." Jim looked at the memorial. "I did not save Danny Morrison, the kid Tom met in the hallway, the reason he came back, or Tommy Walsh, or 266 other crews. No, but you saved thousands more. Henderson's low-altitude tactics, congressional oversight of Wright, better training, all of that came from your work." Jim was quiet for a moment. "Is it enough?" Harrison did not have an answer. Jim left Tom's 147 pages of documentation in the Boeing Company archives, a record of what went wrong, a warning for future programs. Never again rush aircraft into production before they are ready. Never again ignore test pilot warnings. Never again let corporate profit override crew safety. Lessons written in blood. The years after the war transformed the Wright R-3350. Engineers redesigned the cylinder heads, moved the exhaust ports to face aft instead of forward. The exhaust had to snake through gaps between cylinders, but cooling air no longer hit red-hot manifolds first. Direct fuel injection became standard. No more carburetors, no more backfires, no more fires from fuel pooling in intake manifolds. Magnesium content in the crankcase was reduced. The engines were heavier, but far less prone to catastrophic fires. Oil sealing was improved. Better gaskets, better compression fittings. The chronic leaks finally stopped. By 1950, the same basic engine that terrorized B-29 crews was powering commercial airliners. Lockheed Super Constellation, Douglas DC-7, flying passengers across oceans, running 3,500 hours between overhauls, compared to 265 during the war. 34% thermal efficiency, zero point 0.4 pounds of fuel per horsepower per hour. Remarkable for a piston engine, reliable, safe. Everything it should have been in 1943. Jim became a flight engineer for Trans World Airlines, flying Super Constellations on international routes. The aircraft were powered by Wright R-3350 turbo compound engines. Direct fuel injection, all the fixes that came too late for the war. 1957. Jim was flying the New York to Paris route, 12 hours over the Atlantic. 4 R-3350 engines running flawlessly the entire time. He sat at the engineer station monitoring instruments. Cylinder head temperatures rock steady, oil pressures perfect. No fires, no failures, just smooth, reliable power. The same engine type that tried to kill him over Burma was now carrying 100 passengers safely across the ocean. Progress. Finally. Jim retired in 1978 after 35 years in aviation. He never forgot Tom Mitchell or Danny Morrison. 1990, Jim was 70 years old. He visited the Museum of Flight in Seattle. They had a Wright R-3350 engine on display. Fully restored, polished aluminum, 18 cylinders gleaming under museum lights. A docent was giving a tour to a group of school children. This is the Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone. It powered the B-29 Superfortress, the bomber that won the Pacific War. This engine represented the peak of piston engine technology. Jim walked over, interrupted quietly. That engine also killed 267 B-29 crews before anyone figured out how to make it safe. The docent looked surprised. Sir, are you a historian? No, I am a survivor. Jim told him about Tom Mitchell, how Tom came back from retirement to help the young pilots, about the magnesium fires, about Danny Morrison, about testifying to Congress, about Henderson's low-altitude gamble. The children listened with wide eyes. The docent took notes. After the tour left, Jim stood alone in front of the engine, looking at those 18 massive cylinders. The reduction gear housing, the supercharger, the cowling. He thought about 20-year-old flight engineers monitoring these monsters in combat, watching temperature needles climb toward red, knowing that magnesium could ignite at any moment and burn through the wing in seconds. He thought about the congressional hearings, the drunk workers, the misaligned drill press, 8,000 defective reduction gears. He thought about progress, how the same flawed engine eventually became reliable through incremental improvements. Better cooling, direct injection, reduced magnesium, proper quality control, from 265 hours to 3,500 hours between overhauls, from death trap to dependable workhorse. Jim walked to the memorial plaque for Tom Mitchell outside the museum. He stood there as the sun set over Puget Sound, Boeing Field visible in the distance, commercial jets taking off, 777s with engines that run 50,000 hours between overhauls. Those engines existed because of lessons learned from the R-3350 disaster. Never rush complex systems into production. Test thoroughly before deploying. Listen to the people using the equipment. Corporate profit cannot override human safety. Quality control matters more than production quotas. Lessons paid for with 267 B-29 crews. Jim whispered to the memorial. I told them, Tom, about the cowl flaps, about the reduction gears, about everything. It took 2 years, too many lives, but I told them. And eventually they listened. You came back to help those kids. Danny Morrison, the others. I finished what you started. The sun dropped below the horizon, the last light fading from the sky. Jim turned and walked back to his car. Behind him, the memorial stood silent, bronze letters catching the streetlights. Tom Mitchell. Flight engineer James Carter listed among the survivors. A reminder that the most important battles are not always fought with bombs and bullets. Sometimes they are fought by test pilots who come back from retirement because kids need help. Sometimes they are fought by farm kids from Kansas who survive crashes and decide to finish what heroes started. Sometimes they are fought in congressional hearing rooms with 147 pages of documentation and the courage to tell the truth. The Wright R-3350 taught aviation that brilliant design means nothing without thorough testing, that complex systems pushed beyond their development limits will fail catastrophically, that the rush to field technology before it is ready carries enormous human cost. Every modern airliner, every jet engine running tens of thousands of hours between failures, every safety protocol and quality control system, all of it built on lessons learned from bombers that caught fire over the Pacific. 267 crews, written in fire, learned in blood, never forgotten.